And here we are again with another episode of the Get Foxy Show. This time, my guest is Claire Norton. Claire, thank you so much for taking the time. You are clear across the pond in the UK, and so we've got a bit of a time difference. I want to thank you so much for making some allowances for that time difference. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm curious, you are a facial acupuncturist, just like me, but not like me. You've got some different styling to your work. How did you end up in the acupuncture profession?
Okay, well, that's an interesting story. Actually, anxiety brought me into, into acupuncture through suffering with chronic anxiety in my late teens. Somebody suggested I was to see an acupuncturist, and I said to them, there's nothing wrong with my knees or back, there's something wrong in my head. And I assumed that acupuncture was simply for musculoskeletal problems. But when I started to have acupuncture for chronic anxiety, I changed tremendously, and then realized that there was something very magical and very unique to acupuncture. And that sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole of where do I train, where do I go? And luckily there was a college near to where I grew up, not too far. So I went back, got a place, and studied at the College of Traditional Acupuncture, which was the oldest in Europe. It's closed now. It was the oldest it'd been there over 50 years. That was amazing.
And how long did you go to school there for?
That was a 3-year degree.
Okay.
That was a 3-year degree.
And you studied the Worsley 5-element style of acupuncture, whereas I studied TCM. What's the Worsley style like?
So again, 5-element traditional acupuncture. I know that you have some training in 5-element as well. So it's a different approach, and the approach is primarily focused on mind, body, and spirit. The well-being perhaps being one of the most important aspects. Now, suffering with anxiety, you can understand why I was drawn to the 5-element approach initially. In my early days of studying, I wasn't too sure of the different styles. I had a bit of an idea, but through delving more and more, I found myself opened, just fascinated by this style. And since then, I've studied different styles and evolved as a practitioner. I wouldn't even say I'm primarily 5-element nowadays, 10 years since starting practicing. So it was interesting that I was drawn to teachers of, especially in cosmetic acupuncture, with a 5-element background, because it was understood by the system in a different way, and one that I would walk into with ease. So that's how my cosmetic acupuncture evolved, primarily with Paul Adkins, and even with Radha, who is TCM, but looks at things again from a 5-element perspective.
Now, we were having a conversation a while back, which is why I wanted you on this show. You talked about 5-element acupuncture, really kind of delving with mind, body, and spirit. And when we're talking about facial acupuncture, this applies. And you were talking about how you ended up at 19 having an experience with facial fillers. I'd like to hear that story, if you would.
Absolutely. So at 19, I'd broken up with my boyfriend, and perhaps was having a little bit of a bad day, and felt that these nasal labial lines here were quite prominent. My mother had the same. She had a very prominent line here. It's not our face shape. And I rang up a clinic in Birmingham, and I asked if I could have fillers on the phone and how long I'd have to wait. And they said, oh, you're so young, you'll probably only need 0.5 of a syringe. I didn't know what that meant. I just said, okay, take my money, I'm coming. And I made it to Birmingham, and they met me, and they looked and said, well, it's quite you do have a prominent line here. We're going to need about 1.5. So I said, fine, if you think that, that's fine. And my money, and I had the filler in, and I nearly fainted. I was in a bit of a shock, and I didn't look much different because I was 19, let's be honest. And what I really needed that day might have been a friend, it might have been a hug, it might have been some emotional support. But I was broken up from a relationship and sad, feeling quite sorry for myself. I wanted to make myself feel better, and I'd already had my nails done in my head. And so I thought, right, everyone else is having these fillers, I'm going to go. And what a silly girl I was. And they then said to me, in future, we could position the fillers here. It was placed here, Restylane. We could use some fillers here in the cheek to pull up. Can you see? To pull up. And had I had the money, again, I was 19 at the time and foolish. Had I had the money, my face might look quite different today. I imagine having it, being young, impressionable, and wanting to look as good as I probably would. It would have been a slippery slope for me, and that's what I realised. And I now worry: is this what's happening in 2019? The girls are starting having surgeries younger, and I know we've had a conversation about this. This scares me. This really scares me. What are your thoughts, Terry?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is if you were to talk to your 19-year-old self and you were able to say, hey, here's the reasons why you shouldn't do this. Do you think you would have listened to yourself at that time?
I went to anyone, Terry, when I was a kid.
So that's the hard thing here when we're talking about these younger women who are being targeted, and no doubt they are being targeted. Allergan, the company who makes Botox, and these other companies that are making these facial fillers like Restylane, are now ramping up their marketing campaigns to target teenagers, 20-year-olds, telling them that if they do this stuff now, that it will prevent problems in the future. And I see a whole other side of that in that, well, yeah, it's a possibility that you would freeze those muscles, but then are they going to be atrophied when you're older? Will they cause more wrinkles later on? Mm. With the fillers too, you're changing the essential look of your face, and you're taking risks there. Not too long ago, there was a article done by now I don't remember. I'll have to see if I can find the link and put it in the show notes. I think it was from the Daily Mail about a woman in Britain who had received a filler injection, and that injection got into one of the major blood vessels, and her nose started turning purple because the circulation was getting cut off.
You shared it recently, Terry. I'm pretty sure I remember this one. I think you shared it recently on some platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this doesn't happen with cosmetic acupuncture.
No, not in the least. But here we're seeing things. Are you familiar with Snapchat dysmorphia?
No, I've never heard of this term, but I can imagine what it is.
Well, of course, dysmorphia being this mindset that your body looks differently than what it actually is, and in a negative way. And the plastic surgeons here in the States are talking about people, especially younger women, coming in saying, I want to look like what I look like through these Snapchat filters.
No, this is not happening. This is not happening. Terry, this is dreadful.
So if you've got someone who comes in and asks you, Claire, what can you do to help me look like my Snapchat filter? What would you say to that?
I would definitely assess the emotional, spiritual psyche and ask how that person really is coping, it's an unrealistic expectation from any intervention, and I just think it's extremely unrealistic. So again, I've frozen. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. What I'm curious about here is if someone was to do this sort of or ask this sort of question of you, I guess that's a better way to put it. Would you be treating them, for example, in Morsley 5-element work, would you be treating them with an aggressive energy treatment, for example, or possibly possession treatment?
Probably the latter. Probably the latter. It depends. If somebody was to, and again, it depends, you know, with CSOE, if they show signs of having that imbalance, and you know, when you see those kind of imbalances, it would have to be addressed if they had a block that was not, they weren't able to see their own beauty. They weren't able to make sense or function in the world because of unrealistic expectations. There's perhaps an anxiety level there. There's a depression there. There's something that needs to be looked at from the spirit level. And sometimes these obsessions and fascinations, it will be misplaced. It will change to something else. For example, I have people that are obsessed with aspect of their hair being slightly thin when it's not, but once you and there may be nothing really there for us to see, but they'll replace it with another obsession and another obsession. So I think actually what we have to look at is the obsessional thoughts and how somebody sits in their own body and feels about their own beauty. I think that has to be addressed.
And how would you go about addressing that?
With constitutional treatments on the CF, with 5-element acupuncture for sure. Definitely focusing on the emotional level, but also it depends because everybody comes with a different story and a different reason why they are obsessional about looking like a Snapchat filter, or looking like, you know, this wrinkle isn't right, or this isn't right, or I'm too this, I'm too that. There's a lot of self-talk that's not particularly helpful. So maybe we, with every individual, I don't think it's a one size fits all. Everybody who I see, and you'll echo this, completely different, and it'll be working with them with a completely different approach, that's for sure. But as in regards to the acupuncture, how we could help, I do see people quoting facial acupuncture to give you that Snapchat filter look. I do see that occasionally on Instagram. I think that healthy glow that you get from the boost of collagen and the blood flow from cosmetic acupuncture, that's kind of as close to a facial filter as you get. And for some people, that's wonderful. It depends. It depends on someone's expectation. But that also can be discussed, because I do have women after their cosmetic acupuncture look at themselves and go, oh, I've got a lovely glow. Now, is that similar to that Snapchat filter? It depends what Snapchat filter they're put on, let's be honest.
That is the truth. Now, you mentioned treating someone for their CF. For the listeners who don't know what that means, what do you mean by treating someone for their CF?
So in 5-element acupuncture, we diagnose a constitutional factor. Another wonderful teacher will call it a guardian element. So it's one of the 5 elements is simply a protocol for organs of dysfunction that manifest as symptoms of, you know, various descriptions. If there's a disharmony in one aspect, and we all have an Achilles heel, and I do like how it's sometimes referred to as our guardian element, being our greatest strength. That too is true sometimes. So with this ideology, there are an imbalance we will have in our makeup that will explain and make us understand where everything else went wrong. So by treating the imbalance, the kink in the chain, everything improves. So for somebody, say, take the water element, for example, it could be fear. They could be very fearful. They could have a darkness under the eyes, which is a manifestation of poor kidney health. They could be thinning hair. They could be aging prematurely. They could be losing teeth. They could be, you know, So many things that you can see. And I'm just talking aesthetically now, because that's what this conversation started with, as opposed to the whole ins and outs of the water element, which we could spend a whole day on. I know we could. So with just those aesthetic elements, if somebody is showing signs of this, we treat where things went wrong. We treat the element that's not happy. And by doing that, we support their constitution, such as premature aging. We support that, we hold that. We can't make them 12 again, unless they are already 12. We can't turn back the clock, but we can do what we can to support that imbalance, which may be premature aging. And that's just using one example. Of course, with the different elements, such as earth, there may be a different challenge altogether, and so on and so forth.
As we were talking here, I realized, okay, you and I have a pretty good understanding regarding 5-element theory, but the listeners of the Get Foxy show may not. So can you talk just a little bit about what the 5 elements are?
Okay, so the 5 elements are fire. I'm going to have to remember now. I'll visually walk around. Okay, we have the fire element, we have the earth element, we have the metal element, we have the water element, and we have the wood element. They correspond to different organs, and they have different correspondences. And through color, sound, odor, and emotion, that's some of our diagnostic tools, amongst others, we can get a feel for what element might not be tickety-boo, what needs a little tweak. And perhaps there's one predominant that's kicking off and shooting problems all over the cycle, potentially. And finding that element is sometimes fun, sometimes easy, sometimes not straightforward. And that's the joy of treatment. But when you get it and when you get results, it can be transformative for a person.
You're telling me
Sorry?
You're telling me that you can see elemental symptoms in someone's face?
Absolutely, of course. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what would some examples of that be?
Okay, so similar to when I was talking about the kidney, you may see a darkness under the eyes, and some people can look as if they've got some black eyeshadow and smeared it on their eyes. It can look that prominent. And in both Chinese medicine and Western medicine, this both corresponds to kidney function. And that is a little insight to perhaps there's a problem there. Perhaps the energetic needs some support. And then we could look at perhaps the earth element, which may have a sagging skin, the spleen we call this. It may lead to a sagging of perhaps jowls prematurely, or it may lead to a yellow or a muddy colour that you may see from the centre of the face. Diagnostically, we're looking at these signs all the time. It's why I like to work in, it's getting dark here in Leicester, but in the daytime, I like to have fresh light coming in so I can see this. The fire element, you see a lot of redness. You can see there's so many other things that can happen, but a constant redness, it's not fire. It's not the fire element. If it moves and it flickers, perhaps it's the fire element we're looking at. And yeah, the metal element, we can see a dry, it tends to be a dryness to the skin because the lung, hates dryness. We tend to see a whiteness on the face. You can definitely see it around the eyes, but to the untrained eye, it's very difficult to see this. And I have to admit, it took me 3 years to even get a bit of a handle on it. It's very challenging. But now, having practiced, I see it on the bus, I see it on the train, I see it wherever I go. I spot colours. I see it a mile off. Initially, I had to, it's a skill set you have to learn. And JR used to say, what a lovely challenge to learn for the rest of your life, to be able to see and understand and read people. And absolutely, I think it's an incredible skill set.
Yes, face reading is so fascinating because you get to learn about people just by looking at the colors displayed on their cheeks, on their face. And Lillian Bridges teaches in TCM about how every line on its face is related to a specific emotion. And so we can all look at these lines. We read people's faces subconsciously. It's just our medicine has figured out how to kind of consciously codify these things. But everybody can read a face. You can look at someone and say, oh yeah, they don't look, I can't put my finger on it, but they don't look very healthy. Or, oh man, I don't know why, but that person just looks really sad. And we have that innate knowledge. It's there, but because of the training that we've had, yeah, it's fascinating to be able to sit on the subway, for example, or the train or the bus or any sort of public transit, or at the mall or wherever, and just look at people. And go, oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah, and it's so textbook sometimes. Sometimes the behavior that comes with the Constitution, it's really interesting. Just to bring up a point, what you said about being able to witness, to look at these expressions. This is something that we don't get with Botox. And sometimes I see with women similar to my age, I can't get rapport with them because I can't read them. And that there's a barrier there. And I've read so many articles about women having, we are social beings and we read these micro expressions in each other. We do it without thinking. We know if someone likes us. We know if somebody does it. We know. We just pick up intuitively. It's not intuitive. It's these signs that we read. And with Botox and fillers, women aren't bonding with their children. I've read so many articles on these things. That and I definitely see this with people I speak to, there's like a veil that I can't read, and it leaves sometimes struggling to get rapport because I can't read the telltale signs. Do you ever feel that way, Terry?
Hang on just a moment there, Claire. Your audio broke up for just a moment. So would you repeat what you just said?
Forgive me. Okay. I was saying that with the topic that you just mentioned, being able to read people's faces is so fascinating. But sometimes lately with the complete trend of Botox, there are sometimes I'm struggling to read people's expressions and those micro expressions that tell me, have I got rapport with this person? Are they kind? Do we have a friendship? Those little tiny expressions that allow us to read and then act and appropriately. I don't have that with people that have had a heavy amount of work, and I struggle to, and I know there's a lot of research and there's been a lot of articles saying how even small infants are unable to read and bond with their mothers because this innate ability to read the expression lines to see if somebody's happy, sad, angry, mean, or whatever, this has a big veil over it. So this I find difficult, and I find that when someone's had a heavy amount of work, it can be quite hard to read.
Yeah, that's huge stuff. I had some idea about how Botox freezing those facial muscles and stifling that expression would limit communication between adults, but I had not applied that to a mother-child relationship. Holy cow.
So this is just some articles I've been reading lately, and I can understand it. I can understand it because as an adult, I struggle with the same. It depends on how much work somebody's had, but for this reason, I do know that there is a huge shift, and I'm seeing a lot of people that do have Botox wanting to look for something more natural, perhaps not knowing that cosmetic acupuncture even existed. And a lot of my clients that do have Botox and they come to me for traditional acupuncture for whatever reason, they'll come and say, I didn't even know about cosmetic acupuncture. I mean, if I knew about that, I would have come instead of having the Botox. Can I switcheroo here? And that's a really nice thing to hear if we're able to. I think that's really nice if they're able to have a more natural approach. I think they're happier as well sometimes. And again, it's an inside-outside job. It's not an outside. It's not you fill a wrinkle. We are keeping, the whole of the skin looking younger and glowing. And it's, to say it's cosmetic is shortchanging it somewhat. And I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes, I totally agree. I love that you say it's an inside-outside job. We treat the inside and then that's reflected on the outside. Yeah, that is big stuff. And I've agonized for a while, especially after training with a Mary Elizabeth Wakefield. She about slapped me when I said, well, I'd like to do cosmetic acupuncture. She said, no, we
Is
don't
it
call
like
it cosmetic acupuncture around here. We call it, and Mary Elizabeth does what she calls constitutional facial acupuncture, because cosmetic makes it sound superficial, that we're just treating the skin on the face and that's it and nothing more. And this work is so much deeper and richer than that. And there's so many more health benefits to it, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, than just brightening up the skin tone and reducing a little bit of wrinkle.
Absolutely. I heard her mention, I'm sure it's Elizabeth Wakefield mentioned, she likes the word renewal acupuncture. I think it was her that used that word. I might be wrong. Absolutely. I think the internal expression lines, people that have these strong frown lines, that live frustrated in their world, full of anger, that's something we can treat with acupuncture. That's something we can work with. And that is the cause, that's the etiology of these expression lines. I love smile lines. It tells me that person is smiling and kind. It's not something I help people reduce them and smooth them over, but I like to see smile lines. And I think you've got to, should I say crow's feet? That's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's different. I think if someone's internal health, if somebody has had a hard life or they've had a lot of stress, a lot of grief in their life, you can see it a mile off. You can see that a mile off. That is not something Botox can fix. That's something we have to look at internally.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I think personally, crow's feet, these smile lines, the corners of the eyes, those are Foxy.
I love them. I agree. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, and speaking of Foxy, this is the Get Foxy show, so I want to know what your definition of Foxy is, Claire. What does Foxy and being Foxy mean to you?
Being Foxy to me means, and you're saying this, I'm from Leicester, living in Leicester, so we are all foxes here. It means confidence. Confidence is everything. And if you feel good in your body, if you feel confident, you look fabulous. And the most beautiful person in the world can feel so unconfident, and you can, yeah. Can I reword that, Terry?
Confidence.
I'm starting
right there. And that's actually one of the most common responses that I get here, or at least one of the most I guess most common responses. But it's a theme that kind of runs through. There's more to it than just confidence, but that's what the majority of women that I talk to seem to respond to that question.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that confidence and that foxiness, I'm assuming that there's been times in your life where you haven't felt so foxy. And what did you do to reclaim that and get it back?
Oh, perhaps that time I shared with you when I was 19, I didn't feel that foxy, and I did a bad thing. I went and had something very stupid, but I took control and said, I'm going to change something, and I don't feel great, and I'm going to do something. I think now I'm very different, 10 years on, I won't say how long on, but I perhaps behave very differently. And when I feel a lack of confidence, I surround myself with the most awesome circle, and they bring me back up. I surround myself with those that support me and those that I support, and just some time with those people in my world, whether that be online, and you're a part of that, Terry, I will absolutely feel on top of the world from having like-minded people support me and have a conversation and pick me up perhaps when I'm feeling quite low. I also go for acupuncture, like every acupuncturist should, and most do. I think for me, when I feel a lack of confidence, it's down to that evil anxiety creeping in. Now, I don't suffer with anxiety anymore, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's definitely a part of my personality, and given the chance, that little gremlin of self-doubt can nibble away. And for me, going for acupuncture, taking some time out. Sometimes it has to be prioritizing yourself and your health over work, and of course just taking that time to be around supportive people, and sometimes getting your hair done. Everyone likes their roots done.
Yeah, especially me.
Yeah.
For those of you listening on the audio, my hair is receding, and I've probably got it shaved down to about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm joking here. But
you have a mustache to conquer all, though, Terry.
Well, you do have a point there.
It definitely makes up for it.
Well, Claire, if you can believe it, we're bumping up on time here. So I want to ask you, how can people get a hold of you if they would like more information about you and your work?
Okay. So if you would like to hear more about me or my work, you can visit my website, which is www.clairenortonacupuncture.co.uk. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, Claire Norton Acupuncture. And yeah, I'm pretty easy to get hold of.
And she is out there, folks. So follow Claire on Instagram, follow her on Facebook. And if you want more information, you can check out her website. I will have that link in the show notes. Claire, our time's up. I want to thank you so much for taking the time and showing up and being brave and being part of the Get Foxy show today.
Thank you for having me, Terry. It's been lovely to be here.